So our next speaker is going to be Congressman Joe Courtney. The Congressman was elected in 2006 to represent the 2nd Congressional District of Connecticut in the House of Representatives, and he serves on the Armed Services, Education, and Workforce Committees. As a senior member of the Armed Services Committee, Congressman Courtney has worked to strengthen our nation's defense by leading the call for increased submarine production. And because of his funding, secured by Joe Courtney through his committee work, the men and women of Electric Boat have been building 2 submarines every year since 2011. And Congressman Courtney will be telling us about the economic and community issues that he sees in southeastern Connecticut. Congressman Joe Courtney.
So good morning, Daryl, and thank you for the kind introduction. And the turnout here, I think, speaks volumes about, I think, really a lot of the positive energy that we've all sort of been hearing today. And I certainly see it. Representing a district which is basically half the geography of Connecticut, you get a chance to sort of somewhat compare and contrast. Things like, the housing market, job growth, and clearly, I think, southeastern Connecticut has an incredibly positive story to tell right now. And again, we're seeing it, in many different ways that's being manifested, certainly with the development project that we heard here and certainly the town's update this morning. We also talked to the Eastern Connecticut Association of Realtors. We kind of follow their statistics like a box score every month. If you look at the first quarter of 2018, again, the median price for New London County homes went up significantly, double digit, first time in a long time. Interestingly, the number of sales actually sort of fluttered down a little bit, which again shows that there's inventory issues. Again, one of the reasons why I think some of the projects that are starting to sprout up out there in terms of creating different opportunities for home buyers and renters, it's happening very much connected to what's going on in the real world. So again, I think there's a lot to be excited about, as Daryl said, in terms of this region. I wanted to, again, give a quick snapshot. Some of the things that, Maura obviously presented, really are very much happening in real time in Washington. We just passed the 2019 National Defense Authorization Act that, as many of you know in the room, is a measure that has been passed 57 consecutive times over the last 57 years. This will be the 58th. Again, it sets out the sort of military policy for the Pentagon in a whole host of areas, from military pay to TRICARE to end strength in terms of the different services, and obviously shipbuilding is a big piece of that. As the ranking member on the Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee, our office was very deeply involved in this year's draft of the bill, which passed 351 to 66. Not bad for Washington in terms of a bipartisan result. And again, the sand chart that Maura showed in terms of job growth, actually we may have to adjust it a little bit if this plan that we passed in the House makes it all the way through the process. Number one, the 2-a-year build rate is definitely fully funded. So the block contract that we're in the midst of right now, which again is designed around a 2-year build rate, is solid as a rock. The Columbia program, which again is where you saw that big bump up in the chart there, that also was fully funded, $3 billion in the bill that we passed there. Again, there is absolutely no question about whether or not that is something that is going to be strong and consistent. It is not a 1-year blip by any stretch. And again, if you look at the prior administration and the new administration, that is a priority which the Navy and frankly, Secretary Mattis has identified as the absolute top of the list in terms of our whole sort of national security priorities. And again, I just want to foot stomp that point that there's no question about whether or not that's moving forward. They've cut steel at Quonset Point for the prototype of the Columbia class program. They're doing work with the UK in terms of the common missile compartment. Again, this thing is just moving forward. What I think was new and different in terms of this NDAA, which was reported last week in the press after the bill passed, is that we actually increased the authorization for the Virginia program, which again, as Morris said, is 2 a year, to go up to 3 a year. And again, that would be 3 Virginia subs in 2022 and 2023, which is sort of in the scope of the next contract, which EB and the Navy are negotiating right now for the Block 5 contract. And, you know, it obviously means even more of a demand in terms of work in this region. But I have to tell you, this is not being done because everybody in Congress, thinks Groton's just great. It's being done because, frankly, the Navy and the Pentagon, looking at what is out there in terms of Asia Pacific, European theater, and really where we need to have a sort of rebalance of our national defense. I mean, the undersea realm, submarines, again, is at the absolute top of the list. We hold hearings throughout the year before this bill is written, and we hear from the combatant commanders in Asia Pacific. Admiral Harry Harris has been coming in the last few years or so. As many of you saw in the news, he's the new ambassador to South Korea, he was just appointed, a great appointment. But again, when he testified this year as a former Navy pilot, the first thing out of his mouth is, we need more submarines. General Scaparrotti, who's the head of European Command, which deals with this whole NATO region, Russia region, an Air Force, Army general, again, first thing that he said is, we need more submarines. And again, the reason why they're saying that is, even with the 2-a-year build rate, which has been going on since 2011, which Darrell talked about, what's also happening at the same time is we're seeing the decommissioning of the legacy fleet, which was built up during the Cold War, the Los Angeles class submarines. And we got folks here from the sub base who I think can attest to that. So it's almost like a math question. When we were building at 4 or 5 a year back in the 80s and before the fall of the Soviet Union, those ships' hull life is basically running out of capability at a faster rate than the 2-a-year build rate can replace them with. So today we have roughly about 53 attack submarines in the fleet. Even with the 2-a-year build rate, that's still going to flutter down to about 43 or 44 through much of the 2020s. So if you have combatant commanders who today are saying they need more submarines with a 52 submarine fleet, and we're looking at it going down to the 40s in the 2020s. I mean, the fact of the matter is, a 3-a-year build rate is just simply responding to what is really the analysis, the strategic analysis, not the local economy analysis of where the Navy needs to be. And again, that was reinforced by the CNO and others who came in and testified before the committee. So what the bill did this year is, again, it authorized a higher build rate of 3 subs a year in 2022. It also authorized the funding for the long lead items. The first thing you buy, and Maura and her team can verify this, is the reactor. Again, that actually isn't made in Connecticut. It's made out in Ohio. That's there, but that's the process, the 5-year process that gets you to being able to actually complete full construction of a submarine. So obviously, all of the things that we've talked about here in terms of workforce challenges, infrastructure challenges, I mean, frankly, it's if anything, it's even more pressing that we really, in Connecticut, get it right in terms of trying to come up with the right sort of balance in terms of making this actually come together and happen. I want to, again, as a member of the Education and Workforce Committee, I just want to, again, sort of go back to a couple of Maura's points there. The Eastern Connecticut Workforce Investment Board, which, again, has been doing great work, it got the tools to do that work because of a federal grant. A couple of years ago, Secretary of Labor Tom Perez came up and visited EB, took a walk through, and we were successful after that visit in terms of getting a $6 million DOL grant that basically jump-started the whole manufacturing pipeline program. That now has completed its course. 983 graduates have come through that program. That was 248% higher than what the U.S. Department of Labor had projected when the grant was awarded in terms of outcomes. So everything that, more is said about John Beauregard, I mean, we should, build a statue to this guy. Because, in terms of really just getting people to work together and come up with a model that, again, is nationally recognized. And I can say that because when we had a hearing on apprenticeships and, the skills gap, which we were talking about here, there's an association of workforce boards around the country. There's about 500 of them, actually, that have been in existence for a number of years. And when they came in and talked about, successful examples of their work, there were 3 around the country that they picked, and Eastern Connecticut Workforce Investment Board was their #1 story that they told about. And again, he wasn't just pandering because there was a member of Congress on the committee. I mean, it's real in terms of what's happening there. What's unfortunate, though, is that the federal funds have dried up. They ran out in February. And that's why, again, the decision by the state of Connecticut to keep that program going with the investment, in my opinion, is probably as smart a pro-growth policy as you can put together or find in the state of Connecticut. And by the way, EB is not the only beneficiary of that. I mean, this program is not indentured servitude. If a person signs up for it, they are not required to go to work for EB. And in fact, if you look at Beauregard's data, after that first cohort graduated, 130 companies actually also hired out of the manufacturing pipeline. And that's going to continue. And that's why I frankly think there is truly a public interest that you can clearly make the case for, given the fact that the investment is actually going into community colleges and not into EB's coffers in terms of why this is necessary. Yesterday, I was up in Suffield, Connecticut, which is about as far from here as you can go in the 2nd Congressional District, right on the border of Massachusetts. I was visiting a company called Metfin. It's a metal finishing company, Metfin, who sold some equipment down at Quonset Point about 3 or 4 years ago. They go back and maintain and do the repairs. It's a nice contract for them. Again, far away from Groton, about as far as you can go, almost, as I said, in Connecticut. And again, what's their issue? They need more skilled workers when we walk through the facility that's out there. So this is, a statewide priority in terms of making sure that we're ready to take advantage of really what's coming. And again, the defense bill, which I mentioned earlier, 77 new F-35s, all those engines are made in East Hartford. Sikorsky / Lockheed, again, there's more helicopters. The new heavy lift helicopter program was also authorized on that. This is an issue which, again, is really all throughout the state. Frankly, it's all throughout the country. So, how do we address this is one of the questions that came up. So if you look at the technical schools, which again, I think if you talk to most employers out there, they really see as, sort of the, gem in the whole system of getting people, STEM ready, apprenticeship program ready out there to really get into the pipeline. The federal government actually has a big say in terms of how the career and technical education, vocational schools we used to call them, operate. It's called the Perkins Act. Okay, the Perkins Act is the program that basically funds a lot of these schools that are out there right now, whether it's Ellis Tech up in Killingly or Grasso or Wyndham Tech. And again, you go talk to the superintendents of the technical school system, they will tell you Perkins is really the workhorse in terms of a lot of the funding that comes through for these programs. The problem is the Perkins Act hasn't been updated since 2006. And what we have done on the Education Committee is do an update. It passed unanimously in the House last March in 2017. We're waiting, for the House of Lords up in the Senate to finish the process that's there. But one of the things that we did in terms of the update was that we allowed workforce boards to actually go down into beyond community colleges, but younger, into the tech schools to get them linked up with, again, regional workforce needs so that we again, are starting earlier, because I think everybody you talk to out there in terms of how you break through the resistance of a career or technical education, you've got to start younger than we're doing right now. And we updated the K through 12 law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was signed by President Obama back in 2015. And we updated the Workforce Investment Act, which is the apprenticeship program, again, a few years or so ago as well. But that there's a gap in between, which is the Career and Technical Education, and that's the Perkins Act update that's there. So write your senator, okay, and tell him, because no, this is actually something that is quite important in terms of making sure that, you know, we really are capable of rising to the challenge. The good news is there's a support across U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Labor, you know, again, it passed unanimously, so it shows that there is really, you know, really interesting crossover support in terms of making that move. So I know there was a couple other questions which, you know, the Chamber asked me to touch on really quickly in terms of, you know, the region that's here. You know, one that I just feel is important, you know, Joe Dela Cruz isn't here today, but he has really been, I think, one of the most incredible voices in this state to really bring attention to the fact that we've got to get our arms around the opioid, you know, addiction process. You know, I talked to the Groton Police Department, who, you know, and the first responders that are, you know, dealing with this. And again, it is all over the state and all over the country. We passed the omnibus spending bill. President Trump signed it in end of March, and there was a $6 billion increase in terms of the heroin opioid issue that was there, that was included in it, $3 billion in 2018 and $3 billion in 2019. Again, we've met with the police departments because there's a piece of that is law enforcement, because they need help. I mean, the Norwich, city of Norwich had the biggest increase in overdose deaths of any community in the state of Connecticut. You know, talking to Chief Daley, that's over there right now, they could hire 4 more detectives yesterday to just try and keep up with the workload there. So the part of it is law enforcement, to increase the COPS grant program, to allow some of these communities like Norwich and Groton to get more boots on the ground, which is, you know, it's just math in terms of, you know, the volume of stuff that they're dealing with. There's also funding in there for more treatment, particularly, you know, the medication-based treatment, which, again, a lot of the providers out here, UCFS, others have said that, you know, again, they are struggling to keep up with the demand in that area. And then lastly is prevention, which is to go upstream and to really start dealing with issues like pain treatment and obviously education of, you know, as a whole country, frankly, we need to be re-educated about use of opioids. And I just had a hip replacement in January and only used 2 Dilaudid afterwards and threw out the rest that they gave me. And but frankly, you know, we've got to sort of, you know, as a country really come to grips better in terms of how we deal with that, because you talk to any, you know, cop, any treatment person, they will tell you that that is primarily the pathway that has been really driving this pretty awful trend that's going on there. So, you know, that was a bipartisan effort that, you know, Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, which again is one of the hardest hit states in the country, New Hampshire, Connecticut, you know, people have really come together strongly. That is a much bigger increase, frankly, than existed in the prior administration. And frankly, you know, it's not going to be a 1-year or 2-year fix. I mean, this is a real issue that we've got to just, as a country and certainly as a region, keep focusing on. Later this morning, I see Steve White back there from Mystic Seaport. I just want to end on another positive note, which is at 10 o'clock this morning, we're going to be announcing a defense summit in Mystic in September. We're doing it jointly with the Australian government. Actually, the embassy will be joining us this morning to talk about, you know, this effort. Australia is, you know, going through a major increase in their defense budget. They're recapitalizing everything from their Air Force to their submarine fleet to surface ships. So I am the co-chairman of the Friends of Australia caucus, primarily because, you know, I've got to know the embassy a lot because of EB's work over the past really 6 or 7 years, as Australia's been sort of struggling with the Collins-class submarine program. And we're very excited about the summit. We have 100 companies that have already signed up to show up in September for it, and we're bringing it right here. This is the first time Australia has ever done this in the U.S., and Lockheed, UTC, and General Dynamics are definitely going to, you know, they're helping co-sponsor this effort. And we're, again, very excited and pleased that it's going to be this region that's going to be the site for it. And I think, obviously, you know, we've got a lot of good things to put our best foot forward really for the whole state of Connecticut. So again, thank you to the Chamber for, all you do. The Fall Festival is awesome. It's always coincides with these things called elections. So, I have to get out there and do that. And again, you got a great group here. I'd be happy to take a few questions, but I know it's getting late, and I know people got to go to work, so I don't want to hold up. I'm happy to. Yep.
With all this increase in manufacturing and commerce and then the influx of the residential population, what is being planned to upgrade our transportation infrastructure in our area and in the state?
So, if you look at Connecticut's, real, pluses and minuses, infrastructure is a minus. There's just no question moving from one part of the state to the other, or moving cargo or goods. It's a problem. And the one thing that I think was really an issue that we were pretty hopeful about when the new administration came in was whether or not we would get a real infrastructure package. We're sort of limping along with a sort of maintenance level surface transportation program that exists right now. The White House came out with a $1.2 trillion price tag, or dollar amount on it, which frankly I think is commensurate with a real transformational type of program. But as usual, when it comes down to how you pay for it, and I'm not just pointing the finger at this White House. This has been the problem from the prior 8 years as well, is that the plan kind of falls apart. What the White House was proposing was having a 20% federal contribution and an 80% state and private sector contribution, which, again, you go back to Dwight Eisenhower when we passed the first surface transportation bill back in the 1950s, it was the reverse. It was 80% federal, 20% state. And, frankly, if states were that flush in terms of being able to finance infrastructure, then, we'd be already moving forward. So it is stuck. And again, it's always comes down to the two-word question, who pays? And I think, but at some point this has got to give, because again, this is one of these issues where you can get the Chamber of Commerce, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and labor, and just every sector, agriculture, all on the same page. And but at some point we're going to have to come up with methods of financing that gets us off this really horrible treading of waters that we're really not treading waters. We're really sort of slowly going backwards. So in the state of Connecticut, one positive is that we did get a rail line grant from New London to Stafford Springs, the Tiger grant, the welded rail was delivered to Willimantic about 3 or 4 weeks ago. They're going to start there in the middle and build south and north. So we're actually going to see at least an upgrade in terms of cargo capacity and speed from the pier, which kind of dovetails nicely with the announcement this week that the infrastructure at the pier itself is going to be improved. But that's, that's a baby step. We've got to do obviously a lot more. The existing surface transportation plan, which the state DOT is trying to squeeze as much out of. I-95 definitely is at the top of the list, which screams out really from New York to Rhode Island, and I know Redeker has certainly put that. But again, it's not going to happen this summer or probably any time in the next year or so. But it clearly, if you look at the state's priority list, that's still number one, and it should be. So again, if you look at the prior funding that was passed in 2016, the CARA Act, as it was called, again, it was a block grant that came into states and flowed through the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. And I actually think the commissioner that we have here in the state is a very serious person and understands, that you just don't throw the money up in the air and hope it lands in the right place. She really has been, I think, really trying to target effective treatments and getting as much efficiency out of that funding as she possibly can. Again, it was a pretty small, amount that came through in that prior measure that I mentioned earlier. So the new bill that just got passed, I mean, literally yesterday afternoon, SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Office of HHS, announced $196 million for states with high incidence of opioid, and sadly, Connecticut qualifies for that. And I mean, it literally just came out yesterday afternoon, and you know, my office is going to be working with you know, some of the folks in the area, particularly in Norwich, which is just, it's pretty rough there, you know, to try and make sure that they, you know, can jump on this, because they're competitive grants. It's not earmarks. You know, earmarks are a thing of the past. But you know, obviously we've got to, you know, I think we're going to have some new opportunities to do that. And your point about making sure that it's not rip-offs, I think is really, that's where the state regulatory system comes into place. I mean, HHS is not going to regulate the whole country.
Well, actually, I was asking why not, because they're apparently, Florida's cracking down, so they're moving to California.
Well, you know, again, I think that the department should certainly be, you know, using its national sort of visibility to help target, you know, this problem and make sure that state departments of health are watching it. But, you know, there's just no capacity for HHS to actually do the blocking and tackling every day. Yeah. And again, this is a big one. It's a 30-year plan, and sadly, New York sued, and it's kind of put this thing on hold a little bit. But I think we're going to win, because I think it's a great plan, and we balanced it, and you know that. But you know, really long-term for the submarine base, you know, having a viable dredging plan, it was a negative factor in 2005 during the BRAC, because we couldn't, you know, show the Navy that we actually had something in place that was, you know, long-term, and this will do that. This will do that trick. By the way, as long as I'm mentioning the base, in the defense bill that passed last week, there's no BRAC, okay? Just wanted to check that box. I should have mentioned that earlier. And actually, the other thing that I think is really significant, we were just talking about this morning, is that there's actually money in the Navy's budget for planning purposes to build out two of the piers at the base, because the new class of subs, as many of you know, is going to be longer. The Virginia payload module is going to be inserted in the Virginia class, which is going to stretch out the length of the sub, and the piers need to be accordingly extended out. Again, Captain Whitescarver has been a really persistent and forceful advocate for making sure that that's not forgotten in the MILCON part of the budget, military construction part of the budget. So there is money in to get that process started. You know, it's not something that we need next year, but we're going to need it once these longer subs go into play. And by the way, there's no other sub base, whether it's Norfolk or San Diego or Bangor, that has the longer piers either. So this, I mean, just shows we're not sort of at the end of the buffet line. You know, we're right there at the front, and that, you know, in many ways is even more significant about the long-term, and you know, viability of the base, is that we're still investing in the future with those kinds of projects.
Congressman, can take one more question.
And you won't hurt my feelings if you don't. Great. All right, well, thank you. Oh, is there one more? Oh, sorry. I was too soon. Is there another one?
Quickly, I know it's wonderful that everything's going so well with the, you know, all this employment and so forth, but we've kind of been through this, it'll take a long time to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, but I think your point is absolutely on target. And I think, again, some of the discussion this morning is about really trying to, you know, see this as sort of an opportunity for the community to really, you know, make it more livable and, you know, more attractive for people of not just, you know, the defense manufacturing sector, but other, you know, walks of life. And again, shame on us if we sort of let that, you know, one focus really, you know, let years go by, and then suddenly, if the world changes. I mean, I actually do think if you look at the 30-year shipbuilding plan of the Navy, this work is going to be around for a while. They're already planning the next, you know, SSNX, which is the follow-on to Virginia. But again, you know, history and experience has taught I think hopefully taught us all a lesson that you know, building sustainable economies is the best bet in terms of making sure that, you know, you're not going to you know, see a sudden downturn, unexpected downturn, you know, really take the region in the same direction. So I agree with you. I think that, you know, commercial shipbuilding, you know, would be, you know, in the Thames, you know, yard, I love that place, and we actually helped them get a federal grant, in which, again, they don't do any subs. And the pier announcement yesterday in terms of the wind turbines, again, that's another sort of activity that I think is not tied just to, you know, to electric boat, and I think that's all good. And I you know, think that as a chamber and certainly the political leadership should really keep their eye on that ball. Yeah. Great.
All right, everybody, thank you very much for coming, and I want you to extend one more thank you to our speakers this morning. I was remiss earlier when I mentioned a lot of our political officials to not mention Tim Herbst, who is candidate for governor. All right, so we work very hard in planning these programs, as you can see, and we are so gratified that you're here this morning and taking part in it. I hope that you got one or two nuggets that you can take back to grow your business and to progress things in your business. We thank you so much for coming, and have a great day.